Hello and welcome to Mulch, with me, your host Rebecca Anning Brown. This is a weekly podcast for flower farmers who want to build a confident flower farming practice that reflects the lifestyle that you want now and in the future. Each week I'll share conversation and tips to nurture and grow you and your flower farm. I'll open conversations that flower farmers find difficult to talk about, provide approaches that will help you to make decisions, chuckle at the idiosyncrasies of our work, and always be real and honest about my own work as a flower farmer. My goal is to help you to grow a curious, confident and grounded flower farming practice that flourishes as a business that you love and are proud to shout about. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you like what you hear, please do leave a review and share the podcast with your flower farming friends. It really does help to grow a confident and successful flower farming community. Good morning everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Mulch. It's episode 5. It's like the third week. Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the 4th week of January. That's the 4th growing year out of 52. And we're all still here, and we're all starting to giddy up and gear up for the season, which will start soon. The days are getting longer. It makes me so happy to see daylight in the morning and in the evening. How are you? How are you? I'm okay. A bit tired. We had the second of our workshops at the weekend, and it went really well. So there'll be some news around those very soon. And the feedback's been great, which is really generous and really kind. So I'm really looking forward to doing some more workshops with flower farmers over the course of the year. In the meantime, today we are podcasting and I'm loving it. And Antony and I are getting into the rhythm and the swing of writing together and then recording and editing separately, and getting it out there to you. It seems to be going okay. I am really grateful for all the feedback that you guys are sending. Thank you for telling me that you're enjoying it. Thank you for sharing that you're finding it helpful. Do remember to message or email if you have any questions or there's anything you'd like me to talk about. The email is rebecca@silvergreyfoliage.com, and you can always message me in the DMs on Instagram. Please don't worry if I don't reply straight away. I just struggle to keep on top of everything coming from all directions. It really does feel like the podcast is a good first step for us to help more people to get on and grow successful flower farms, and that's what we really intend to do. This is probably a good time to say, if you're listening to the podcast and you're able to, please do get a pen and paper today. It might be helpful with the first suggestion so that you can really picture what I'm talking about. And the other thing to say is that I'm recording at my desk, which is in our back room. There is an old fireplace in here that is too small to put one of those balloon things up in the chimney to stop wind coming in and out. The fireplace is, however, deregistered and disconnected because it was dangerous. So if you hear whistling, that whistling is wind. We do not have ghosts in the house. It's just wind in the fireplace. And I'm sorry. One day maybe I will have the technical know-how to be able to get rid of those things, or we will have a sponsor, which would be amazing, who would then pay for somebody to be able to edit out those sounds. Anyway, those are thoughts and hopes for the future. For today, it's just me, and Antony will be recording. No, he won't be recording. He'll be editing shortly. So before we get on to the meat and potatoes of today's episode, I'm going to broach a subject that is difficult to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. We have promised you an honest podcast, and we've promised you honesty about behind the scenes at Silver Grey Foliage and how things work. So Antony and I are doing some parts of the podcast together. We are alternating on some roles, and we plan to continue making the podcast useful to you in your flower farming businesses. So after some careful consideration, we have made a decision today to say that we are really grateful that you're enjoying the podcast, and we're really glad that it's helpful and industry specific for flower farmers, written by flower farmers for flower farmers. So if you are finding it useful and if you are enjoying it, if it's helping you with your business, if you're listening regularly, Antony and I are asking you to buy us a coffee. You see, I even stumbled trying to get those words out. We're happy to share the coffee because we're a married couple. We share all sorts of things. Essentially, it's too early in the podcast for us to be asking for sponsorship, even though it seems to be doing well in the land of ratings. And really, that was never our aim. We're not trying to make crazy amounts of money out of the podcast. That's not our intention. However, we are strong believers, and I in particular am a strong believer in one of Brené Brown's mottos, which is discomfort over resentment. If you're not aware of that as a motto, I'm just going to talk you through it. So one of the things that I promised myself when we started running Silver Grey Foliage as a proper business is that we wouldn't work for free. And that's because in our other careers, it's expected that we will do work for free. And I know that many of you as career changers are coming from similar professions that are vocations. And when they're a vocation, that expectation grows and grows with your seniority and experience. And there comes a point where most people become a little bit resentful of that. So these are difficult words to share, but I'm always honest. And so I think it's important for you to understand the background to any requests that we put out there. So that boundary it's really difficult to negotiate between discomfort and resentment, because what we want is to be helpful to the flower growing community, to the flower growing business, and we want to make all of the things that we do accessible. So we really do consider our pricing carefully when we're thinking about courses, because we know that there are so many competing interests when it comes to finances, both today and in general in our business worlds as flower farmers. And so we really want to make sure that what we're doing is adding value and is helping you to get on and grow. So the discomfort is that we're asking you to buy us a coffee, and there's a link in the bottom in the show notes, or if you're on the website, there's a link on the web page, so that we don't start to worry about the time and effort that we're putting into the podcast, because it does take time, and it's taken us a while to get the measure of how much time that is. And in reality, it's somewhere between 6 and 8 hours per podcast. By the time we've sat down to write it, we've made sure that the content is edited down so that it's a length that you're able to listen to. There's no point me waffling on at you for 3 hours about topics. And then we've recorded it, edited it down, uploaded it, made sure it's on all the platforms and hosting correctly, and got it out there to you and published some social media. It takes more time than we expected, and we will be able to refine that. But in the meantime, we think that our costs for doing that are in the region of £80 or more per episode. So using the app Buy Me a Coffee, that's 16 coffees, which isn't too many. And I definitely know that there are more than 16 people listening to us, which is such a massive compliment. So thank you to all of you who are listening. I'm not going to ramble much more about this. I'm going to say thank you from the bottom of my coffee-loving heart to all of you who are kind enough to offer us that donation to help to support the work that we're doing. We plan to continue doing it. I just need to know that the time that we're putting into it is not time that's detracting from other things that will help us to earn our living. Thank you. Okay, so on to the meat and potatoes of today's show. So for those of you who are not from the UK, and in particular those of you who are not from Yorkshire, the meat and potatoes is a turn of phrase that means the bulk of the core content of today's podcast. Now, I've actually moved today's episode forward in our planning. I was going to do it later on in the series, but I have already heard this word that's pretty close to my heart more than I want to have heard it in the first 4 weeks of the growing year. It's January, and things really should be and are quite slow and steady at this time of the year. And yet I've heard the word overwhelm so many times. And it's the reason, if I'm completely honest, that I first wrote the Flower Farmer's Planner a couple of years ago, and I hesitated to write it because the idea actually came up the year before, and I thought, nobody will want this. But in reality, the aim of the Flower Farmer's Planner was to be able to help people to get things down in a logical and structured order so that they could see what needed doing. They could just keep ticking things off steadily, so that they didn't feel that sense of overwhelm. And yes, there's loads to do as a flower farmer, but it's doable and you can do it. And I really want you to be able to do it without that sense of anxiety that comes from having so much to do that you don't know what to do next. Now, I am 100% aware that everybody works in different ways. And so I've made 3 suggestions in today's podcast. And if those things don't work for you, fine. Let them just, float away off your back so that they're not things that you're holding on to and thinking, I really must do these things. That's not the intention here. They're just ideas of ways that you might think about dealing with that sense of having so much to do and not knowing what to do next. If they are helpful, please use them, and please use them to help you to just be able to get on and grow, to enjoy the work that you're doing and not to get any stress or difficulty from it. Okay, so I think I've covered some of this already, but the reason that overwhelm upsets me is because it makes you stop in your tracks. It makes me feel frustrated that you're almost doing even less because you know that there's so much to do. It really gets in the way of people being able to do their work. And that, for me and for others, gives me that sense or feeling of failure, like I'm not succeeding or I'm not getting anywhere or I'm not achieving in our business what I need to achieve on that day, week, month or year. And logically, I know that's wrong. But overwhelm isn't about logic, it's about that sense of being overburdened. And it's incredibly hard to be logical when you're feeling like that. And you start to feel like you're moving backwards rather than sideways, or preferably even forwards. So, interestingly, I don't think that overwhelm is unique to flower farming. I think that it's just talked about more openly in our business than it is in the other work that we do. And I am acutely aware that overwhelm in both flower farming and other businesses and other worlds and professions, frankly, is one of the factors that contributes to burnout. And flower farming is such a wonderful thing to do as a career to earn money from, that burnout just isn't something that I want us as a community to be feeling. And so, as a flower farmer who's passionate about my work, I would, if it was humanly possible, actually do it 24 hours a day, but it's not humanly possible. And so when that overwhelm, which is born out of enormous personal and emotional involvement in our business, I think that, in addition, makes it even more difficult to manage. So, I'm going to dive in. We've got 3 things to talk about. And I have used the word manage, and I say that because Again, I repeat, there is a lot to do as a flower farmer. And even when I describe the hats that we wear to our friends or kind of extended team, they exclaim that it really is a lot to juggle in order to achieve beautiful flowers. And yet, I really do think it's possible to have a system or systems that you can work within that will keep this in control. So, yeah, part of this is self-care. I reference that a lot. It was a huge learning curve for me last year to really delve into looking after myself and Antony and the children as we grow and run our business. And because it's had such an enormous impact, a beneficial impact on the way that we live and the way that we work, I am passionate about sharing the self-care methods as well as the logical and strategical methods with you so that you're bearing that in mind in everything that you do. Okay, so let's take that first method that I'm going to talk to you about today. And this is one that I've adapted from one of my other creators, and I use it all the time because I think it's really helpful. And this is also the exercise that would be helpful to have a pen and paper for. So what I want you to do is to take your pen and paper and to draw a big box in the middle of your piece of paper. Once you've done that, I'd like you to draw a cross in the middle of the box so that you're splitting it into 4 boxes. They don't have to be equal. This is not an exercise in perfection. And then along the top, over the top left-hand box, I want you to write urgent, and over the top right-hand box, I want you to write important. Next, along the left-hand side, I would like you to write essential next to the top left-hand box. And next to the bottom left-hand box, I'd like you to write non-essential. If you are having a moment of frustration this morning already, I would then like you to scribble, colour, shade, cross out the bottom left-hand box with as much vigour as you would like. So essentially you've got a big box, bottom left-hand corner is coloured in whatever format you feel is appropriate, and you've got 4 words: urgent, important, essential, non-essential written on. So let's go through those boxes. The first one is the most important. It's the top left-hand box. So this is the box that, if you look at it a bit like a graph, is marked urgent and essential. So these are the sorts of jobs that if you don't do, the business can't continue. They're the things that help you to keep your contracts with your patients, hilarious, your contracts with your customers, which is essentially to grow flowers and foliage that are beautiful. Now, depending on the type of flower farming that you do, whether it's wholesale, retail, weddings, funerals, whatever, your priorities might be slightly different, and the things that go into these boxes might well be slightly different. But for me, the absolute essentials that my business cannot do without are those regular habits. So things like watering, feeding, checking seedlings, planting out, cutting and delivering orders. Those for me are the absolute priorities, especially once we reach growing and sowing season and cutting season. Getting those things absolutely right, making sure they're done regularly, is a thing that helps me to produce a high quality flower and good quality foliage. So those are the things that or the sorts of things that I put into that top left-hand box. Obviously, depending on the day, that will change. And this is an exercise that you could do every day if you wanted to. If you've got a long list of jobs and you think, I'm never going to get all of this done, draw yourself a box and work out what goes into that top left-hand box, because those are the things that you get done first. They're the important things that make a difference every single day. So the next box to fill in is on the top right. So this box is the one that's marked important and essential. So important and essential means that they need to be done, But if you don't do them right now, if you don't do them in the morning, it's okay if they've waited a little bit. They are essential, so for business continuity, to keep everything moving and ticking over, you do need to do them, but they're not your absolute priority. This may feel slightly controversial, but the top of my list in the important and essential box is emails. They are rarely urgent. Sometimes they are, but very rarely. And so they are rarely the first thing I do or respond to or acknowledge in the morning. The next thing, and again, slightly controversial maybe, is social media. So unless you are telling people that there is a failure in business continuity, there's a reason that you're not going to be able to get flowers cut and delivered on a particular day, I would argue that social media is important because it helps us to market and advertise our flower farms, but it's not urgent and therefore is not my priority first thing in the morning. Now, if you do have those messages that need to be conveyed to all customers as quickly as possible, it is one method of doing that. However, arguably, email might be better because most people see their emails on their phones as well as on their computers, and it's much more likely to pop up quickly. So yes, by all means, tag all bases, and if you have that kind of emergency, then social media and emails do actually become urgent and important. But on a day-to-day basis, I think it's difficult to argue the case for those things. Again, I'm conscious that there are some people listening who may question my logic here, but I'm going to say that photography is also neither urgent nor essential. It is important and essential. And the reason I say that is because we grow and sell highly photogenic products. Flowers are beautiful. People love seeing pictures of them. People absolutely love seeing pictures of them and what we grow and how. However, when that photography becomes your primary output each day, I would ask you to question whether it's interfering with the work that you need to do to earn you money. So I'm not saying it's not necessary. I'm saying it's not always the priority, and it comes after those things that actually help us to get fantastic flowers that people want to buy. Other things that fit into that important and essential box rather than urgent are things like ordering sundries, ordering compost, planning infrastructure. They're things that we do in advance, so they're not things that we have to do right here and now. They might be things that we notice that we need to deal with when we're in the field working and we take a note of, but we actually deal with them slightly later on in the day. And often those kind of ordering tasks can be batched, so you can sit down and buy seeds and tubers and corms all in one go, rather than doing it as you go along throughout your day. And finally, in my box, and this is my list, I would put things like pulling off weed flowers. Now, this is something that I'm going to do more and more of this year, because I have been guilty in the past of putting weeding higher up the list than I really think it needs to be. And so I want to be pulling off weed flowers regularly. It's not my most important job, but it is necessary and important, and doing so will help to reduce the amount, well, I hope it will help me to reduce the number of weeds in our field. Because weeding for us is something that I put into box number 3. So box number 3 is important, so we do need to do it, but non-essential. So it really doesn't have to be done first thing in the morning. I'm afraid it's not the sort of thing that I would be keen to be doing in the evening unless I'm doing it for my personal therapy, and I do quite like weeding, just as a mindful activity. And it's just not going to change anything until or unless the weeds are so prolific or they're so big that they are stopping me from reaching my flowers. And so the intention of pulling off the flower heads would be to reduce that proliferance, is that a word? And also to stop the weeds from growing quite so tall and getting in the way. So in this important and non-essential box, I actually don't have many things because I'm quite ruthless. If things fall into this category, I really do question whether I need to do them at all. Now, weeding, I obviously do have to do so. Weeding is in that list. The other thing that I have on that list is perfect grass and lawns. Now, I'm not particularly fond of grass unless they're pretty grasses that I can sell to my florists. I'm not particularly fond of grass at home. I think it's a waste of garden space, but we do have it because the children like to play on it, and I feel obliged to keep some garden space for my kids. But in general terms, I think it's a waste of time. Now, this is taking into account that we don't have any visitors to our growing spaces. So we don't have field tours, we don't do pick your own, and that's because of where we are based. So it's just not an option for us. So bearing that in mind, having a perfect lawn just doesn't feature. I'm not interested. But we do cut the lawn back, or the grass back, in the areas that aren't covered when they start to get in the way. So when it starts to irritate our skin, when it's coming above our boots, when it's stopping us from being able to push wheelbarrows and trolleys and things around, then it becomes important. But before that, I'm afraid it's just something that I ignore. The box that you have crossed out is a box that is labelled urgent and non-essential. Now, those are obviously opposites, so they don't exist. There's no such thing as something that is urgent but non-essential, and that's why you've crossed that particular box out. If you can find something that goes in that box, I'm not sure what I'd offer, but I'll try and make sure there's a prize for you. So I think you'll be able to see that these are the steps that I'm going through to try and rationalise and prioritise the work that absolutely needs to get done first, and then everything else follows on. And to make this work, a bit like everything else that we suggest, you really do have to be honest with yourself and quite clear about what your priorities are. So unless Kate Middleton decides to come and visit my flower farm, which is so unlikely, manicured lawn is not something that it will ever have. It's accessible, it's as safe as we can make it, and those are my limits. Just throwing it out there. So apply this, give it a go, be honest with yourself about what is genuinely urgent and essential, and it will help you to say, these are the things that I'm going to get done. If I achieve anything else, that's lovely, but it's a bonus. And once you've done that, it helps you to think, actually, the jobs that I need to do right now it's actually quite a short list, and I can do that. And it removes that sense of overwhelm, because what you really need to get done is often shorter than the longer, wider list of intentions and jobs. Okay, moving on to the second way that I deal with overwhelm. And this is also an exercise that requires pen and paper, but it's more of a journaling and reflection exercise. Because one of the things that stops us, that I described earlier, was that sense of, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not growing my business, I'm not being successful, this isn't working, or I'm a failure. And those are those feelings that sort of float into our minds and bodies when we're feeling overwhelmed and things are a bit more challenging. So this exercise involves you writing a list. Some people would call it a gratitude list. Some people would call it a journaling list. It's a lovely technique that I picked up last year, and it's really about writing down your achievements, because you will always have achieved and done more than you think. So it's an exercise that you can do across the course of a day, a week, a month, and it's about reflection. It's about looking back at what you actually have done, say for the month of January, and maybe I'll set you all the task of sitting down with a cup of tea. I do love a cup of tea, and doing that exercise today or tomorrow at some point this week in a quiet moment. Sit down with a pad or a pen and paper or a whiteboard or your phone and the notes section, wherever you want to do it, and just write yourself a list of all the things that you've already done in your business in the first 4 weeks of the year. you will surprise yourself. It won't be one or two things. It will be tens of things that are contributing to the work that you'll do, to the flowers that you'll produce over the course of the year. And when you do that, you get a really kind of positive boost. When you read through, you think, oh my goodness, I've done all of this. Oh my goodness, I am actually moving forwards. I know that today or right now I'm struggling, but look at all of these things that will make the season easier, more productive, more successful. You're always doing a better job than you think. So I really want you to sit down and do that. I'm setting homework. Goodness, setting homework on a podcast. I'm famous for homework, so I'm surprised it's actually taken me to episode 5 to set you guys some homework. But have a go. See how you feel about it. Okay. So the final thing that I'm going to suggest might for some of you be a little bit out there and a little bit woo. But I'm going to say it anyway because I think there are relative extremes that you can go to with this. And so there is part of your flower farming practice that may work here and parts that may not work for you. And that is the practice of letting go. So when you start to notice, when you start to feel overwhelmed, and we all have that sense if we listen to our bodies when things are starting to upset us, when we're starting to become more tense, when we're starting to just have a little bit of a fast heart rate, when we're starting to just feel clouded because there's so much running around in our brains. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that along with me, and this is something that I'm practicing this year, it's not something that I'm an expert with, but you learn to walk away and to do something else. You do what, Rebecca? You learn to walk away. I'm being quite serious. I'm not suggesting that you go on a 10-mile run. I'm not suggesting that you pretend that work doesn't need doing. I'm just suggesting that we acknowledge that feeling in our bodies and we go, I feel quite tense, I feel quite anxious, I feel slightly overwhelmed. And we take a moment to hear that and to reassure ourselves that actually it's not necessary, it will be okay, and that we're doing the work. Now, there are lots of ways to do that, and it might be that you do a 2-minute gratitude list, the previous exercise. Or it might be that you make a cup of tea and you sit down in your favourite corner of your flower farm for a couple of minutes or 5 minutes and down your cup of tea and just look at all the beauty around you and think, okay, I know there's a lot to do, but look at all of this wonder. Something that I quite like to do as an alternative is to walk around my field or my garden and to pick a flower and to just admire it. Like, we grow beautiful flowers, and I think when we cut them and we send them out by the hundreds, we lose perspective on the wonder of what we're doing. And so sometimes I will pick a flower and I'll look at it and I'll just stare at it and I'll look at every petal and the veins and the intensities and the changes in colours across the petals. And I'll smell it, and then I'll do something that I did as a child. I will pull the petals off one by one and blow them away. It's a fun thing to do. It's a mindful thing to do. But it's also giving yourself an opportunity to really enjoy the luxury of the work that you're doing. It's not just for your florists and your customers. It is for you as well. Something that I've done a couple of times with the children when I have felt overwhelmed. I haven't necessarily described it to the children as the reason for my activity, but we'll go on a bug hunt. We farm sustainably, so we don't use chemicals. We use a whole lot of poo from all sorts of different animals. And we have a lot of bugs in our fields. So we will go around and we'll have a look in a couple of beds and see how many bugs we can find. Often we'll find bugs that we've never seen before. Often I don't know the names of them. I'm okay with that. I'm just happy to see the diversity that we have in and around our flowers. I don't need to know the names of everything. And I think it's just important to repeat that I am not ignoring the feeling. And I'm not trying to shut it in a box and pretend that there isn't a lot to do. Instead, I'm just listening. When I say just, but I'm listening and acknowledging how I'm feeling and giving myself a moment to just I guess, recalibrate and say, it will be okay. It's a small element of self-care. I'm pretty pro self-care, you'll be able to tell. And so that was my final offering for today. So that is 3 ways of dealing with overwhelm as a flower farmer. The first is a clear prioritization exercise. The second is a type of journaling or gratitude exercise. And the third is about stepping away and reassuring your body. They're very different methods, and I hope that one of those will be helpful to you or more. And I'd love to hear from you if they're helpful, either in our messages, in your stories, when you're sharing the podcast with your flower farming friends, or in an email. That is it for today. It's always a longer episode than I expect. Thank you for listening. Please do continue to share the podcast in your stories. Please take a moment to rate and review wherever you are listening, because it helps other flower farmers to find our work and help them to get on and grow. If you've enjoyed listening to the podcast, Antony and I would be extremely grateful if you would buy us a coffee. And we will be back next Monday with another episode about flower farming in practice. Rebecca.
Thank you for listening to Mulch. I hope that you found it useful. To find the show notes, head back to our website where you'll find links to all the things that I've been talking about in today's episode. If you're on Instagram, you can find us at Silver Grey Foliage. I would appreciate it so much if you were able to share this episode in your Instagram stories. And if you are able to leave a review, it really will help more people to get on and grow. I'll be back with you next Monday to talk about more flower farming in practice. Rebecca.